Okay, well, we have way less people here today than normal, so that's okay, though. So we don't have a ton up on the board, so we'll probably be able to get you guys out of here in like 10 minutes, because we don't have a ton of stuff up here. The test is completely finalized. I think it's a pretty good test. I feel really confident that if you guys really focus a lot of your studying on causes of the Civil War, and then Reconstruction.
Students, we have water available inside the main office. If you need some water, please head over to the main office. Mr. Damon's got some water available for you.
Anyways, so if you study Reconstruction, and if you study causes of the war, especially causes of the war, I'd say it's probably like a third of the entire test. So if you really study those two, you'll be okay. Don't forget that there might be a couple of questions, especially immigration. I did notice up here that there are some women's rights stuff, about 4 of them. The one thing that I would emphasize is that there's not going to be that much on women's rights on this test. In fact, most of the women's rights stuff is going to focus on Reconstruction, which hopefully when I say that, you automatically know that that is the 14th and 15th Amendment. So that's going to be the major focus, because we did have testing on the women's rights movement on the last test too. So just be aware of that. Okay, so if we were to have ones on the women's rights movement on the test, major things that you need to think of is more these two right here would be the ones that I would focus on the most to answer this question. So the Seneca Falls Convention is going to be where they're going to get together and say that now we want to be able to have more rights. Remember, that's where they do the Declaration of Sentiments. And that kind of becomes the first start of attempting a women's suffrage movement. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is a really good source. So if you ever see her name, know it's women's rights, whether it be women's rights in the 1840s, it could be women's rights with the 14th and 15th Amendment, and it goes all the way up until I think she dies in like 1908. So this could be one that could be constantly in there. I would spend less time focusing on 1840s women's rights and more time focusing on Reconstruction women's rights, because that's going to be the one that's going to be more likely to be on the exam. Okay, so and Harriet Beecher Stowe, if she were to be on there, Harriet Beecher Stowe is going to be the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. So just don't forget, Uncle Tom's Cabin is going to be in there. That's where her name is going to come up. Focus more on Uncle Tom's Cabin, the word, rather than the author, because you are most likely to see Uncle Tom's Cabin. Remember, big things about Uncle Tom's Cabin is 1, it kind of exposes the horrors of slavery. 2, it causes England to remain completely neutral in the war. That's a really important factor of it. And 3, it makes Northern abolitionists much more abolitionists. It makes some people who weren't abolitionists, it makes them into abolitionists. And then in the South, it angers people because they say this is not how slavery actually is, you're just making it up. Yeah.
So can you say that like Uncle Tom's Cabin was like cause?
Yes, it would be considered a cause. So if you had a causation LEQ, that could be one of your ones that you use as a cause. Think about foreign trade as well. That's an important one to remember too. Okay, so other causes of the war. Starting off with the earliest is going to be the Wilmot Proviso. Wilmot Proviso is, remember, Mexican cession. So we end the Mexican-American War. The Mexican cession is therefore acquired. Now we have to figure out what are we going to have in these territories. Is it going to be slave or is it going to be free? The Wilmot Proviso was the first attempt at satisfying it. Remember, this satisfies northern free soilers. Free soil meaning no slavery in the territories. So with the Wilmot Proviso, they say that there will be no slaves in the territories. That angers the South. It makes the North happy. It fails in Congress, but it's kind of one of the first attempts at solving this problem. It's one of the very first compromises. One of the important causes of the war are the compromises. So we attempt at compromising. Think Henry Clay, Compromise of 1820, Wilmot Proviso, Compromise of 1850. But as these compromises happen, it begins to really disintegrate and sectionalize us more until eventually there's no more compromises. We can't just keep putting Band-Aids on things. We have to stitch it up. So, Compromise of 1850 comes 2 years after the Wilmot Proviso. This one is a really important term for this test, so make sure you know Compromise of 1850. So, Compromise of 1850, that's Henry Clay. Remember, Missouri wants to come into the Union, but what happens is that with so with the slave states coming in over into the West, including like Kansas and Nebraska, not Missouri, that's Missouri Compromise. With these new states coming in, they now have to decide how are they going to be admitted. And it becomes a massive amount of hate and anger. People can't figure out how are we going to compromise this. What the compromise does is a couple of things. So to satisfy the North, it admits California as a free state. So that's the first one that's going to do. Then, as a compromise on both sides, they say popular sovereignty, which is going to be basically you can vote on slavery. Popular sovereignty is going to be admitted into the territories. Think Kansas, Nebraska. Think violence from there. Ways to satisfy the South, the biggest one is the Fugitive Slave Act. Basically, with the Fugitive Slave Act, even if they run away, it doesn't matter because they have to come back. That one is very important in knowing why the South was happy with this, is the Fugitive Slave Act, or Fugitive Slave Law. The other thing that happens to satisfy the North is D.C. is going to ban the slave trade, or ban slavery in Washington, D.C. And then Henry Clay dies, so we can't compromise anymore. So, following that, then we go into the Dred Scott decision. So, importance with the Dred Scott decision. Remember, this is where that slave goes up with his master into a trip into the North. He says that he is now free. He sues for his right to freedom. It goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. Judge Taney, T-A-N-E-Y, that's his name as a sourcing. Judge Taney decides one of probably the worst decisions in American history. Basically what he says is because he is not a citizen of the United States, he has no rights as an African American, therefore he has no rights to sue. So as a black man, you have no rights, therefore you can't sue. That's the first one. Second thing he says, and this is really important, Compromise of 1820 is completely unconstitutional. You cannot say that the North is going to be free and the South is going to be slave. And then finally, it also says you cannot use popular sovereignty in the territories. So basically what that says is that the federal government cannot decide what's going to be in the West. It has to be up to the individual states. So basically what this does is this is going to be a massive satisfaction for the South. South feels like their slaves are now protected. This is really a catapulter, I think it was in 53 or 54, into the Civil War. Now, during this time, the Republican Party rises, in particular in the year 1850. These are going to be your Whigs, your former Federalists. The Republican Party is going to be in the North. Republican Party is going to be based on several different things, but the major thing that they're going to focus on to get votes is going to be anti-slavery. Now, this is many different reasons why, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily an abolitionist as in slavery is evil perspective. I would say that it was what the North wanted. Republicans are going to move towards that. So they're going to be in the North. Their major figure is going to be Abraham Lincoln. Republican Party, when it hits the year 1860, remember that's when the nation gets split. All the Democrats get split, which is why they lose the vote. Lincoln gets elected, and the South secedes. The South is going to be the Democrats. Following the war, the Republican Party kind of splits into two. The moderates are going to follow Lincoln's plan. That's going to say we're going to be more compromising. And then you have the radical Republicans that are going to do anything and everything they can to get rid of slavery and help everything African American. So increase of rights, 14th, 15th Amendments, radical Reconstruction with the Republican Party. Panic of 1857. Basically what you need to know about this is with all of this fuss, anger, things like that, we end up going into an economic decline in 1857. Because of that economic decline, the South and the North suffers, and whenever there's an economic decline, there's going to be conflict. This is highly unlikely to be on the AP exam, and especially highly unlikely to be on the test. Just let you know. Okay, and then last one, scalawags and carpetbaggers. So these are going to be the people that are going to be in the Reconstruction South. So in the Reconstruction South, remember, they're going to be the taking advantage. They are the con men, doing anything and everything they can for personal gain. So the scalawags are the salamanders. They are the politicals. They are going to be going into office pretending, oh, hey, I'm a Democrat, but just kidding, I'm actually helping the Northern Republicans. So they kind of take advantage of the political system. And then the carpetbaggers are the people in the North that go down to the South. they're going to abuse the economic power. So they're going to trick African Americans into giving them money. They're going to exploit the wealth, anything they can for personal gain. Remember that carpet bag is a suitcase. They stuff the money in the suitcase, and they're gone. All they want is their money. So negative impacts of Reconstruction. All right, and that was it. So does anybody have any additional questions? Okay, well, if you do, let me know. That was really short. You still have like 10 minutes, so have fun.